Hey, what's going on, my friends? Last week, I gave you a little taste of the new Axe Effects firmware, version 16, the mighty Cygnus. And that was with the Friedman amps, which, if you like saturation, is a really fun, lively amp to play for your lead tones or rhythm tones or anywhere in between. This week, I wanted to get my hands on some of the Fenders and specifically show you guys how you can get a preset that sounds kind of S.R.V-ish using the Vibroverb AB model. So I'm starting with a very laid back, clean sound. For starters, we'll build from there. We'll get into more of the gritty, Stevie stuff as we go on. But for right now, this is what I got going. So really fun, beautiful, chimey, clean sound with a lot of character, and that's what you get from the Vibroverb amp. Let me show you what I'm doing here in Axe Edit, and you can follow along and build your own preset out of this. All right, so here I am in Axe Edit, and at the very start of the chain, I want to make sure you see this. I've got the noise reducer setting so that when I do flip on my single coil, it's blocking out some of that noise that I might get. So you can hear if I take this off, probably hear a little something coming through. Not too bad. Certain other pickups can get bad as the gain goes up, but yeah, a little bit of that is not so good in my ear. I like to turn that down about 60, about minus 64, somewhere around there. Sounds good for my guitar. Cuts out all the noise. So of course we're using the Vibroverb AB amplifier. And let me tell you about some of the things that I've got going here. So input drive is at 5, just at default setting there. Bass is dialed back to about 3, so that when I'm down in those low notes, they still sound somewhat powerful, but they don't sound muddy. Treble I've got pushed up pretty high, but the bright switch is off. So you get a nice balance there. With the bright switch on, it just gets a little shrill, especially in that position 4 single coil sound. So here's what it sounds like. Now, if I had the bright switch up, you really hear that treble start biting your head off. Just way too thin and harsh, so I'm going to leave that off. I've got my input trim backed off just a smidge there, so 0.692 gives me a nice, clean, punchy sound without too much grit getting in there. Next page, I want to show you in the ideal settings. I think for my guitar, and these are Suhr V60 LP pickups, my single coils here, they're a pretty balanced single coil in my experience. They don't have a lot of that sharp, ice picky high end because of the lower frequency peak in the pickups. So that helps, but I still get on this amp model, I still get a lot of that high-end sizzle, which can be good to a point, but I like to back that out. So the high treble setting in the ideal tab, I got it down minus 3.5 or so. And again, that's really just getting rid of that shrill, ice picky stuff that comes through a little too much in your single coil sound sometimes. Nothing else in this tab has been adjusted, so it's all default except for the high treble setting. Something I did in the power amp setting, I've doubled the transformer drive, and I've turned the transformer match up slightly, 1.215 there. So check that out. Not much else is different. Actually, nothing else is different, I should say. Power supply, everything's as default settings. Speaker, I did turn up the low res frequency here just a little bit, so it's at 120, and that sort of helped to clean up the bottom end again. I don't like that muddy sound that you can get when the frequency is too low there. So as I go, it's not too bad, it's got a punch to it and not any of that muddy character. 0 speaker drive in that new section for Cygnus. Speaker compression is just a little over 2. Nothing crazy there. Input EQ, let's see. I did turn the low cut up to 120. Again, cutting out as much of that mud as possible. Everything else is default. Output EQ. So this is where I start to get really nitpicky. Here I've got my ultra lows, the 63 down minus 2.10. Same thing with the 125, and 150 is down about a decibel. Again, all of this is just giving you a more focused, tighter bottom end that's not going to get lost in a mix or sound non-distinct or flubby. On the high end, this is sort of a delicate balance here, and it really is going to depend on your instrument and your touch on the instrument. But for my ears, for my pickups, my guitar, I turn this stuff down a smidge, 2K, kind of that pick attack sound, just a little bit less than normal, about a decibel off. 4K, as we drift into the higher and higher frequencies there on the top, I like to take out just a little bit of that, so I'm avoiding that painful sensation that you can get sometimes when you're playing a loud single coil guitar. So about minus 2 decibels in those categories. Dynamics tab, I do like to use a little bit of that gain enhancer, especially when I'm playing through monitors and not a roaring PA or something like that. So yeah, the output compressor here is set to just above 0.50, so I've got 0.76, and my threshold is kicking in, so minus 31 for me probably gives me somewhere between like 1 and 3 decibels of that compression activating. Let's see what it does. So not a whole lot, just maybe a couple of decibels there. And that gives me a nice spongy quality when I really dig in. Dig it. So moving right along, the cab, the one that I've selected is the Legacy number 181. That is a 115 vibrato verb mix. So it goes really well with this amp model. I think it's specifically designed for that. But a couple of notes. I've, again, tried to cut out some low-end energy at 80 hertz. That's where my low cut is, 12 dB slope. High cut, I've got at 10K roughly, so 10,341. Again, 12 dB high slope there. And that's about it. One thing I want to say is it's really important to find a good matching IR when you're doing these amp models. A lot of the sound hinges on what the speaker captures is doing. So in my experience, if you're really after that S.R.V kind of a tone, this is a great one to start with. There's a lot of other choices in the Axe effects, but if you happen to get your hands on the IR that Tyler Grunn made, that is one of the best IRs I've ever heard for this type of sound. You can plug it into software, you can plug it into the Axe effects, and I've had it sound great in so many different contexts. Really impressive. Make sure to give that guy some love. Give him a little something if you download that IR. Let me know if you liked it or what you think of it, and also let him know and thank him for his hard work on that. All right. So we've got our amp, our cab. I'm going to go back to the beginning of the chain here, and we're going to check out the compressor, because this, for your feel, that amplifier-like feel, this does a little magic for me. This makes me feel like I'm playing something that is a living, breathing tube amp. So what I've done here is I've cranked the level up just a hair, so about 1.5 decibels. So I'm hitting the front end of the amp a little harder, giving me just a little bit more grit if I really dig in. Lowered the compression from the default setting. It comes out at 5 for the JFET compressor. And the threshold is down to about minus 34, which is a really good place. You know, again, I'm not getting tons of compression. Really kind of using the compressor as a boost, and it is controlling the dynamics a little bit. If we look here in the gain reduction, it's not jumping around too much, just a little bit of dynamic control there and some slight boost. Moving over towards the end of the chain, I do have a little bit of chorus going on here. I was trying to emulate that sound from the In-Step album, specifically the song Riviera Paradise has a little bit of movement you can hear. I'm pretty sure they added that in post-processing. But nevertheless, I was trying to capture just a little bit of that swimmy, swishy kind of a sound that's over his tone. And the way that I got that is to use the 80s style chorus. And some of the settings I've changed here is increase the rate to 2.548. Over here, let's see, we've got a mix of 21.9. And then the tone, dial back the high cut to 3.545. And low cut up to 100 hertz. Little bit of drive here, just giving it just a little bit of that dirty, chorusy kind of vibe. And that's about it there. I have two reverbs going on. Why do I want two? Because number one is like the built-in spring reverb, which it's just there. You can kind of hear it sizzling on the high notes, a little bit of that spring action. So this is the deluxe spring verb. In the mix, just 8.7, just enough to kind of hear it on your louder playing. In the EQ, I've taken out about 2.5. Why? Because sometimes reverbs can give that harsh sound as they're coming back at you. When you hear the reverberation, if I was to play something high, there is a little bit of a tendency for that spring to hold too much of that harshness that I tried to get rid of from the amp earlier. So just getting rid of a smidge of that, -2 decibels. Everything else is default. So in the other reverb, this is set to be more of a plate sound. Again, trying to capture some of that more 80s Stevie Ray vibe, which was drenched in reverb. And this actually gives you a lot of satisfaction when you're playing along with tracks. Sometimes when you're playing with tracks, you don't feel like the guitar may be sitting particularly right sometimes next to the other instruments. So this helps to add a little bit of depth, a little bit of sustain on those big bends. So what I've got here is mostly default. I did lower the time of decay to 2.65 seconds. Over here, I'm running it in parallel. I just think that works really well for this type of sound because you get the straight through reverb, plus you get a little added plate reverb on the side. My level is -16. And then last but not least in my chain, I found some annoying frequencies in the IR. On this particular one, this vibroverb mix, there were a couple of places where it just wasn't sounding quite right to my ear. So what I did was I isolated these frequencies in the higher end, and what I found was by sweeping around, I was able to locate about 3K or so, and then really dip that out with a high Q value. And then also down about 1.5, that is an area there's just too much mid-range weirdness. I didn't like the sound of it. Anyway, it could be different with your pickups, your gear, but this helped me a lot to get a smoother sound, not too much grit in the wrong places. So as you probably know, Stevie tuned down a half step. I'm in standard tuning. I'm not really going for the exact nailing of his tone, but it sure is fun to try these things out and just see how they work for you, see how it changes your playing. If you're digging this so far, let me know in the comments below. If this sounds nothing like Stevie, let me know as well. I'm curious to hear what you think. All right, next up, we got to try to nail down that searing blues, overdriven, tube screamer, saturated sound. So here's my guitar in the neck position. It sounds like this. So, you know, again, not exact, but it sounds pretty nice, pretty close enough for my ear, and it's a lot of fun to play. This is what it sounds like as I start switching through the pickups. Here's my position 4. And then here we go down to the middle position, which, you know, you would use every once in a while. Like Okay, so what do we got going here? We must start with the Tube Screamer T808OD. I've got the drive barely even on there. It's like 0.40 tone all the way up, and my level is almost maxed out. So really I'm pushing the amp, but not a whole lot of drive coming from the pedal, just boosting the level so much that the amp is distorting more. And then the mix I've actually brought down 85.1, and the reason for that is I wanted the saturation, but I don't want it to overwhelm. I don't want that pedal to overwhelm the beautiful tone coming from that Vibroverb model. So anyway, that's what's working for me. I'm liking the sound of it. Moving on down a little bit. I didn't mess with the tone page at all. Everything there is at default. Graphic EQ, I did take out a little bit of 4K because it was sounding just a little too sizzly. Again, this will boil down to your own pickups, your own guitar, how loud you're playing, things like that. But for me, recording or using my studio monitors, I think these things actually have a little bit of sizzle in them, as they are more sizzle than average. So I brought down that 4K, about 3.5 decibels. In the advanced tab, I turned the bass response up to 6. I think it defaults to 5. For me, I just wanted a little bit more bottom end on some of these notes. And that sounds about right for my ear. All of this other stuff, the slew rate, bit reduce, sample rate, all that stuff is just going to be at default. In the amp block, everything is the same as it was in the previous setup. Gate, same thing. Cab, same thing. The reverbs are the same, but on the Sun plate, I've actually brought it down because the level increased on this preset from the overdrive. It didn't sound quite right to use exactly the same level on the reverb. So what I did is just brought it down to minus 22.7. And this is the default decay time on the Sun plate. The previous one was just a smidge less than that on a higher level. So in any case, this gives me that nice sustain and pushes the guitar back just a little in the mix when you're playing with tracks. That way it's not so in your face, but it's not so far out that it's losing its impact. And then again, the last thing at the PEQ, those same little things that I took out to make the IR work better for me, gives me that nice sizzly sound without so much that it's going to take my head off. So this is what we end up with. I guess that'll about do it for 1 week. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope this gives you some good insight on how to get that S.R.V tone with your Axe effects or your FM3 or whatever it happens to be. Let me know what questions come up. Let me know how this all works for your guitar, your pickups, your hands, and all that stuff. In any case, I hope you enjoy it. Have some fun, and thanks for being here. I'll see you next time.